although The Lord of the Rings is clearly a fantasy classic, I've always maintained that it's not nearly as good as people make it out to be. Upon my most recent reading of the book, I have finally come to the rationalization that the book is not as good as the Harry Potter books, right? It does have pacing problems. Not a whole lot happens. The characters aren't as memorable or interesting. They're not as funny. They don't have as much variety in their plots. There's a lot of things about Lord of the Rings you can say like positive things about, but I really don't think it's the hallmark of fantasy that people make it out to be. There are lots of fantasy writers that I prefer over Tolkien, even his best friend C.S. Lewis. And although I enjoyed the book for what it is, I don't necessarily see it as like one of the best ever or like a major influence on my work. If anything, I take pride in the fact that I am in no way influenced by Tolkien. I've kind of um, explained this before, but my primary inspirations, my influences have always been the Harry Potter books and anime, right? Like I really enjoy the creativity of Japanese media, especially Nintendo games, but I do think the major thing that kind of drove me in this direction was playing No More Heroes for the first time, taking in all those neat designs, the violence, like the really complex story and themes, and that was something that I wanted to accomplish in my work. And so like I ended up creating like my own unique style that's very radically different from everything that I think exists, especially from Tolkien's work. And one of the things I've noticed going into Lord of the Rings and seeing what it's about, and I'm not criticizing Tolkien for this at all, seeing what it's about, like I realized very quickly that like the entire core concept of Lord of the Rings is different than American Evil, my upcoming novel that's coming out in exactly 3 months, actually. Um, Lord of the Rings, the entire point of Lord of the Rings, and I do think this is like very well known among fans. The entire point of Lord of the Rings is like emphasizing that like the hobbits are great. The little people are amazing. They go out and have adventures and like save the world and like they do great things by just doing being who they are, right? They are critical to the plot in spite of being this like massively overlooked force by like the forces of darkness of Mordor, right? Like it's an essential part of the plot that like Bilbo and Frodo are not like from long lines of adventurers or from a race that's known for like getting involved in these kinds of certain current situation. They're not elves. They don't have a long history of like of being from a warlike culture. They're just normal farm people like who live out in the Shire, right? Like they live in a rural community. They're popular there, but they're well known there, but they're not necessarily like prestigious people. However, by the sheer will of their like good nature and like their desire to be good people, they end up like destroying the One Ring, right? The object of Sauron's desires that would allow him to take over all of Middle Earth, right? Cast it into never-ending darkness, right? Like again, like the entire point is that like how important the little people are, right? Again, that's like again the entire point of the book. I would argue. And again, this stuck out to me so much reading this again because like it's so well executed, it's so well handled. One of my favorite things about the book actually, and it's exactly the opposite of what happens in American Evil. It's the exact opposite. Like I've always said that like American Evil is kind of like the anti-American Beauty specifically because of how like it condemns like the evils of society and stuff like that, like the message that film tries to depict. But like one of the things that like that really amounts to is emphasizing that like the average person is terrible, right? Like how nobody does anything, everybody's lazy, stupid, incompetent. They will gladly sacrifice their own children for their own comfort and security, right? Like they would go to great lengths to uh, to uh, to acquire like the objects of their desire, even if it means like destroying someone else's life, right? Like again, like American Evil is like condemning these people, right? Like again, like that's kind of the idea is that like all of the bad things that happen in American Evil could easily be stopped if people actually did anything about them. But no, they just sit at home, comfortable, like doing nothing. And that's the plot, right? Is that like somebody rises up and deals with these problems. Those people force change, right? They force these people to accept the real world and to reject evil because evil, the forces of evil can't stand up to the forces of good, right? Again, like it's interesting because like uh, it has it's so completely different than like Tolkien's work in themes and like the ideas and how it's executed and like what it's trying to say, but like it's weird. It feels like we've observed the same kind of people, but just come away with like different experience, different perspectives on it. You know, when Tolkien writes someone like Lobelia, Sackville Baggins, right? Like when he writes like what a bitter like old hag she is and how like she spent her entire life like lusting for like a bag end. Like she wants that house. Like I don't even know why, but she wants the house. Like when he does that, when he like builds this character up, establishes that like both Bilbo and Frodo don't like her. Like when they do this, when he does this, right? You really start feeling as if like yeah, the idea is that like in Lord of the Rings is that she's just some like minor annoyance compared to like the real threat that like that's like lurking outside the Shire's borders, right? The idea is that like Lobelia isn't that big of a deal at all, right? Uh, and like meanwhile, like the way I would look at it, considering like my background and stuff like that, like I would have a lot of resentment towards someone like Lobelia. You know, someone who has no interest in Frodo or Bilbo's well-being at all, someone who's selfish, someone who like wastes Frodo's time, someone who just lashes out at like just he's just an evil, nasty person. Like to me, that's a really big deal. I take that really personally, and it's those kind of people that kind of make up like the bulk of the antagonists in American Evil. I would even say that there is one character in particular that is the same kind of character archetype. You know, the bitter old lady like next door, right? Like it's the same people but different perspective, and like there's no like one way or right way to do this, honestly. Like again, I'm reminded very strongly of how like Tolkien himself didn't like Dune, right? He released a statement about it and then like said something like, well, I respect the author too much to like go into detail about why I didn't like it. Like I don't think an author should necessarily condemn another author for having the same kind of world a different perspective on how a story should be told, right? And I do kind of feel the same way. Is that like, if anything, I kind of feel like the opening in the chapters in the Shire are like some of the strongest work in Lord of the Rings. You know, that bit where they leave the Shire and like get chased by Black Riders until like it's boring for like a good chunk of it, other than like maybe like after they meet Strider. Like, you know, the Tom Bombadil stuff. It's terrible. Okay. It's pretty bad. Like, but again, like the actual Shire stuff is really compelling, really well handled, and like you totally understand where he's coming from with it and what he's trying to do and like what he's trying to get across. And yeah, it's really interesting thinking about that going into this, where like, am I wrong for the way I depict characters like that? Am I like a broken, miserable person? Like, what does that say about me as a creator? What does that say about Tolkien? What does that say about any of us, right? Like, um, I'm very curious. Like, I'm very interested in seeing how people react to American Evil. This is, I think, a really landmark title for me. You know, I finished it last weekend. It's about 194,000 words, I think. I'm cutting it down right now. I'm editing it. I'm looking at it right now to make sure it's as good as possible before release. Um, like there are a lot of things in this book that I think are going to be like major things going forward in the Codyverse. I think like the most blatant of which is like how I treat like the Muggle characters, right? Like I call them Muggles because like my phrasing. I only just read. It's this book where I invented like the phrasing that I use to refer to the Muggles, right? I kind of confirmed this already, but the term I use is the cattle, right? To emphasize just how these people are worthless and they don't really contribute anything. They aren't going to be able to influence world events. Like they're too lazy and stupid to even know like what's happening to them, right? Like that's kind of the mindset I have going into this is like coming up with my own unique take on like the Muggle concept. I really am excited to see just how people react to this and how they respond and whether they enjoy it or not. It does seem like this is going to be a major title for me, and I'm very excited to see how people how people react to this book when it finally sees release.